In December 1970, Led Zeppelin entered London's Island Studios on Basing Street, kicking off the initial sessions for what would become their most iconic record, known as Led Zeppelin 4.
Like, subscribe, thank you.
In the studio, a staple for British rock bands was bustling, with Jethro Tull working on Aqua Lung just down the hall. For Led Zeppelin, though, something was missing. The sterile studio atmosphere didn't inspire the group, who had grown accustomed to recording in unusual settings that fostered creativity and spontaneity. A month later, on a bitterly cold January morning in 1971, the band, Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, John Paul Jones, and John Bonham, arrived at Headley Grange, a remote, crumbling Victorian mansion in Hampshire. The structure, known more for its bleak history than any cozy comforts, was far from welcoming in the dead of winter. They hauled in the Rolling Stones mobile recording studio, a rough and around-the-edges setup outfitted with empty egg cartons for soundproofing. Despite the lack of refinement, the mobile studio allowed the band a level of creative freedom impossible in traditional settings. Headley Grange was much more than a recording space. It was a place that seeped into their music. For some, the manor's damp, eerie atmosphere sparked discomfort. John Paul Jones would later recall that they all ran in when they arrived in a mad scramble in order to get the driest rooms. Jones found the place uncomfortable and dull, far from the idyllic countryside that they had envisioned. But for others like Jimmy Page, the location's ghostly vibe added to the album's mystique. Engineer Andy Jones recalled how Page was less concerned about the cold than he was about the creepy noises or flying furniture, as if the house's own haunting past might infiltrate the music. But the building's odd charm began to inspire them in unexpected ways. The massive echoing hallway known as the Minstrel's Galley became the perfect amplifier for Bonham's explosive drumming. It was here that John Bonham recorded the thunderous opening to When the Levee Breaks, his kit strategically placed in the cavernous hall with two bidydynamic M160 microphones suspended from the staircase. The resulting sound, compressed with an Italian echo machine known as the Benson Echo Rec, was monumental. Andy Johns described the moment of realization vividly. He remembered sitting there thinking how it sounded totally amazing. I ran out of the truck saying, "Bonzo, you gotta come in and hear this." John Bonham was like, "Wow, that is it. That's what I've been hearing." Bonham's booming drum beat would later become one of the most sampled in music history, with artists like the Beastie Boys, Eminem, and Bjork, to name a few, sampling it. It's also on the rock version of Pants on the Ground. But amid the isolated atmosphere of Headley Grange, the creative process unfolded organically. Tracks came together spontaneously with few limitations. One night while Plant and Page sat by the fire, lyrics began to flow for what would become their most legendary song, Stairway to Heaven. Holding a pencil and a piece of paper, Plant wrote the famous opening lines in an almost trance-like state. "There's a lady who's sure all that glitters is gold." The eerie quiet of the studio encouraged an almost mystical sense of creativity, where songs seemed to emerge fully formed from the isolation. As the band members huddled around fireplaces to ward off the winter chill, Robert Plant continued to channel lyrics almost as if they were given to him, particularly on Stairway to Heaven. Reflecting on the experience later, Plant remarked, "Jimmy and I just sat by the fire. It was a remarkable setting, and I was in a very bad mood. Then all of a sudden my hand was just writing out the words. It was almost as if it were through a vessel." And for Jimmy Page, too, the fourth album represented the perfect culmination of the band's creative peak. He had a vision for Stairway to Heaven that went beyond the lyrical depth. The song was to be a journey, shifting and evolving with each section, almost like a classical piece. But Page would later say that the idea was to have a song which would actually change as we went through it, where the layers would unfold, instruments coming in, drums joining later, and then building momentum up for the guitar solo. And with each recording session, Led Zeppelin 4 was taking shape as an album that pushed the boundaries of rock, blending folk, blues, and hard rock with unprecedented dynamics. Jimmy Page always had a knack for making things deceptively simple. The solo on Stairway, for instance, might strike the average casual listener as having been played in a simple A minor pentatonic. But he snuck in that flat six, and the song itself was able to build up with a pseudo-Aeolian pentatonic mixture that became one of the most iconic guitar solos of all time. The camaraderie among the band members was as essential as the isolated setting. One night, in a lighthearted attempt to blow off steam, John Bonham launched into the cymbal-driven introduction to Little Richard's Keep A-Rockin'. Keyboardist Ian Stewart, a longtime collaborator with the Stones, was on hand and playfully added this roundhouse piano riff in response. Without missing a beat, Jones and Page jumped in with a riff, and Plant joined in with an improvised line that would become the chorus to Rock and Roll. Within minutes, a new track was born. It ground to a halt after 12 bars, Page recalled, but we knew we had something. And that impromptu jam became one of Zeppelin's most defining songs. A high-energy homage to the early days of rock that perfectly balanced their musical sophistication with that original, gritty energy. While rock and roll was forged in spontaneity, other tracks required meticulous experimentation. The folksy ballad, The Battle of Evermore, began when Page picked up Jones's mandolin one night, despite never having played the instrument before. So out of his experimentation came a haunting melody, and Plant's lyrics soon followed, inspired by this fascination with Celtic mythology and British history. Yet as the song took shape, Plant felt the lyrics required a dialogue, like two voices were narrating this epic tale. So for this, they brought in Fairport Convention's Sandy Denny, whose voice intertwined with Plant's, giving the song a uniquely ethereal quality. Denny's vocal contributions were so integral that they granted her a personal symbol in the album's artwork, a rare honor for any musician working with Led Zeppelin, of course. So as each track progressed, the interplay of the band members' personalities added depth to the recordings. Interestingly, it was Jones who came up with this really cool riff that was actually in 5/4 time. Bonham actually had trouble playing along to it because the way the riff would just kind of wrap around on itself at the end when it would loop. So he just said, screw it, added a 4/4 beat to it, and it just totally worked. So really, Black Dog is actually in two different time signatures at the same time. Jones had said that he wanted to try a riff with a rolling bass part based on kind of like more bluesier stuff that he was into, but it couldn't be too simple. Bonham's vocal wails provided the final touch, elevating Black Dog from a simple riff into one of Zeppelin's most powerful songs ever. But of course, they needed a name for the track, and like many Zeppelin songs, often the name was something that was seemingly unrelated to any lyrical content in the song. But really, it just came down to the fact that they named it after a black lap dog that was hanging around the studio and would wander through the woods behind the place during the recording. Another interesting thing about this album is that the one song that really probably should have been the biggest hit in some ways because it was so listener-friendly was Misty Mountain Hawk. Just an all-out fun song, starting off with Jones's bell-like keyboard line, and then all of a sudden the guitar's kicking in, playing that double line that just goes down, A, G, E, 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 and repeating. Robert Plant had some pretty wild vocal harmonies going on over the verses, almost slightly dissonant, but yet it worked totally perfect over the chord progression. But then when they get to the break sections, the song just picks up, and it's probably the happiest song on the album. It's some really sweet harmonies by Jimmy Page during the guitar solo for that one as well. As the sessions wore on, Zeppelin's creative chemistry was growing stronger. Each member was pushing the others to explore new musical territories. John Bonham's drumming in particular was the backbone of this album. He always had that powerful, relentless style, and his contribution to Led Zeppelin 4 reached legendary status with the track 4 Sticks. And this was another challenging one for Bonham in terms of time signature. But after several frustrating takes, Bonham impulsively grabbed an extra pair of drumsticks, now wielding 2 in each hand. And the result was his ferocious, thunderous performance, which inspired the track's title, 4 Sticks. In terms of its main progression, that is interesting in and of itself since it has more of a Dorian tonality. A lot of play off the major 6th and the minor 3rd created the perfect tension which sat perfectly over Bonham's sonic assault. And then it totally changes up, getting more into Lydian dominant territory where Plant's doubled vocal over the top just gave it this exotic, otherworldly feel. Alongside Bonham's thunderous presence, Jones continued to experiment with the bass and keyboard parts, often drawing on influences from folk and classical music. For going to California, Jones picked up a mandolin again, adding a delicately plucked melody that perfectly complemented Plant's yearning lyrics. The song, an ode to Plant's romanticized vision of California and his unrequited infatuation with singer-songwriter Joni Mitchell, emerged as one of the album's softer, more introspective tunes. Plant's lyrics painted a picture of a mythical California he had in his mind, a place with queens and lost souls, set against a backdrop of mountains and trembling earth. The band's gentle instrumentation underscored this vision, creating a song that felt like a bittersweet escape from the darker, heavier tones on the rest of the album. And as the band crafted these diverse tracks, Headley Grange itself played a crucial role in the album's sonic identity. The echoing halls and naturally reverberating rooms gave the recordings that unique spatial sound. Bonham's drums on When the Levee Breaks recorded in the Minstrel's Gallery, created a sound that was more than just percussion. It was an atmospheric force, almost apocalyptic rhythm that reverberated with a sense of impending doom. John Bonham didn't just play the drum. He played the walls. He played the ceiling. He made sure the presence of the kit filled that entire room, and the capture of it on this one was nothing short of pure brilliance. When the Levee Breaks was a reimagining of a 1929 blues tune by Kansas Joe McCoy and Memphis Minnie, reflecting Zeppelin's deep connection with the roots of American music. Slowing down the original tempo and saturating the sound with echo, the band transformed When the Levee Breaks into this hypnotic, dirge-like masterpiece that closed the album on one unforgettable note. But despite the organic nature of the sessions at Headley Grange, the band faced significant hurdles in the final stages of production. By February 1971, with basic tracks completed, they returned to London to add overdubs at Island Studios. But mixing the album turned into a nightmare. On engineer Andy Johns' recommendation, Page and Johns took the tapes to Los Angeles Sunset Sound for the final mix. Almost as soon as they arrived, an earthquake shook the city. A strange omen, considering the line in Going to California about the mountains and the canyons starting to tremble and shake. Unfortunately, the mix turned out to be disastrous, and Page was furious with the results. Back in London, they played the Sunset Sound mixes in Olympic Studios, only to find out they sounded really thin, and Page's frustration with Andy Johns just boiled over, with him commenting that Johns should have been hung, drawn, and quartered for the fiascos he had played. So in the end, Jimmy Page took it upon himself to redo the mixes, painstakingly adjusting every detail to create that massive, immersive sound that he had envisioned. The delay in remixing the album pushed the release date back from April until November of 1971, but the extra time turned out to be well worth it. The end result was an album that just sounded as powerful as the band had intended, capturing that energy that they had gotten at the studio during that time. So with the final mixes complete, Led Zeppelin's fourth album was ready for release, yet in typical Zeppelin fashion, they chose a path that defied convention. Frustrated with the critical backlash they received on previous albums, especially Led Zeppelin 3, Jimmy Page decided to leave the album completely untitled. No name, no band logo, just a stark cover image of a framed painting depicting an old man carrying a bundle of sticks on his back set against a crumbling wall. And this anonymity was deliberate. Page wanted the music to stand on its own, free from the biases of the critics who had often dismissed their work earlier. Instead, each band member chose a personal symbol to represent them on the inner sleeve, a cryptic code that only deepened the album's mystique. And over time, fans and the media would come to refer to it as Led Zeppelin 4, or Zoso, but to the band it was simply an untitled album. And the album cover itself became a part of the enigma. The front image, a 19th century painting that Plant had actually found in an antique shop, was carefully photographed to give it this weathered, timeless feel. The back cover showed a photograph of Salisbury Tower in Birmingham, a crumbling high-rise that hinted at the balance between the old and the new, rural and urban, a symbolic nod to the music within. And for the inner sleeve, Page chose an illustration based on the tarot card of the Hermit, reinforcing the album's sense of mysticism and introspection. Even the typeface for the Stairway to Heaven lyrics inside was carefully chosen, inspired by an alphabet from a 19th century arts and crafts magazine that Page had come across. And the album's mysterious presentation worked. Upon its release on November 8th of 1971, Led Zeppelin 4 became an immediate commercial success, selling out in record stores and climbing the charts on both sides of the Atlantic. Demand was so intense that Richard Branson's fledgling Virgin Records had set up special stalls in order to be able to sell that album. In the United States, however, it was kept from the #1 spot by Carole King's Tapestry, yet it didn't matter. Songs like Stairway to Heaven dominated rock radio, and the album remained in the top 40 for months. It soon became clear that Led Zeppelin had crafted not just an album, but a full-on cultural phenomenon. The success of Led Zeppelin 4 transcended sales. It actually became a touchstone in rock history. The album's sound, a perfect fusion of hard rock, blues, folk, and just all-out experimentation, would influence countless musicians for decades to come. Black Dog and rock and roll became essential entries on the radio and in the canon of rock all around, capturing that energy of the genre while adding layers of complexity and sophistication. And meanwhile, the Battle of Evermore and Going to California demonstrated the band's willingness to embrace kind of more mellow, softer folk elements. But it was Stairway to Heaven that became the album's crown jewel. An epic journey that captured the imagination of listeners worldwide. People were just blown away by that track. Yes, the arrangement was huge and it was epic, but it was also very listener friendly, and not in a way where it was like trying to be a hit. It just built up so tastefully and gradually. And by the end, the band was just completely rocking out, and Robert Plant was singing pretty much at the top of his range. It just all of a sudden just breaks right back down, and he just softly sings that line, and she's buying the Stairway to Heaven, leaving listeners wondering what the hell just happened the first time that they heard it. But Led Zeppelin 4 will definitely go down in history as one of the best albums that has ever come out. It has a little bit for everybody. So to my subscribers, I just want to thank you so much for all the feedback and just coming in and having a good time with me on this channel. And if you haven't had the chance to subscribe, make sure you smack the living hell out of that subscribe button. And while you're at it, give the like button a good whack as well, and I want to thank you so much for joining the family. Something really weird I just found out. The most expensive guitar on Amazon is a signature guitar, and you won't believe whose signature guitar it is. I left the link below in the description. And to my subscribers, I really want to thank you so much for all the inspiration and feedback. I truly do appreciate it. And if you haven't had a chance to subscribe to this channel, make sure you smack that subscribe button. While you're at it, hit the like button, join the family, and I want to thank you so much for watching.